My childhood didn't begin with fancy breakfasts or the hum of luxury cars. It began with the smell of warm porridge at dawn, the soft shuffle of Grandpa's slippers in the kitchen, and his gentle voice calling me to wake up. I lived with my grandfather and little sister, Emily, in a small old house tucked away in the heart of the city. It wasn't big, it wasn't grand, but it was home. Our tiny world, held together by love and quiet rituals. Grandpa took care of everything. He cooked every meal, folded our clothes, and told bedtime stories with such warmth in his voice that I often drifted off mid-sentence. Every morning, he'd wake me with a kind smile, prepare our breakfast, and walk Emily and me to the school gate. In that little world, I felt love in the simplest things. A hand on my head when I was sad, a playful wink when he secretly gave us candies. Those seemingly small gestures became the foundation of memories I still carry deep inside. We didn't have much, but we had Grandpa, and somehow that was more than enough to call those peaceful days. That morning felt different. I woke up earlier than usual, not because of a sound or a bad dream, but from an uneasy feeling deep inside, as if something was calling me from the quiet. Everything seemed still. Too still. There was no clatter of pots in the kitchen, no warm aroma of porridge in the air. The silence was thick. The stove was cold. The home that once buzzed with soft morning rituals suddenly felt hollow. I walked toward Grandpa's room. The door was ajar. He was lying in bed, eyes open. Yet something was wrong. The usual twinkle in his eyes was missing. His face looked pale, his hands slightly trembling. This wasn't how he looked when I said goodnight the night before. I stepped closer, my voice barely a whisper. "Grandfather!" He turned to me slowly and gave a weak, tired smile. "I'm okay," he said softly, trying to reassure me, but I knew. No, he wasn't okay. And in that moment, I felt it. Our peaceful little world was about to break. Emily walked into the room just as I was standing frozen beside Grandpa's bed. A thin stream of light from the window fell across his face. That face, usually warm and glowing with life, now looked pale in a way I had never seen before. He was still. Too still. His eyes open, yet distant, as though he were staring into a place none of us could follow. My sister stopped in her tracks. She didn't say anything at first. Then, in a voice so small and afraid it barely rose above a whisper, she asked me the question I dreaded the most. "What's happening, brother?" That question echoed through my chest. I couldn't lie to her, but I also didn't know how to tell her the truth. One thing was certain. I couldn't wait. My heart was racing. I turned and bolted out of the room, through the hallway, flung open the door, and ran barefoot across the cold pavement. The ground was rough beneath my feet, but I didn't feel it. I pounded on the neighbor's door, hand trembling. "Please, someone help. My grandpa, something's wrong. Please." The door opened and the elderly woman who lived next door saw my face. Her eyes shifted instantly from confusion to urgency. She didn't ask questions. She just followed me, her footsteps fast and firm. When she stepped into the room and saw Grandpa, it took her only one glance. "We need to call a doctor now." Her voice was steady, but the air around her tensed. Time seemed to slow down and speed up all at once. My thoughts were foggy. Then, a piercing ambulance siren shattered the stillness. Red lights flashed against the walls. Paramedics entered. They placed Grandpa gently on the stretcher, his body lifeless, yet peaceful. I followed, clutching Emily's tiny hand. Her fingers were ice cold, like mine. The door closed behind them. And just like that, the house wasn't the same anymore. Everything was still there. The wooden table with its worn edges, the chair where Grandpa used to read his newspaper, the family photo that hung on the wall. But without him, these things felt empty, like memories turned into echoes. No more morning laughter. No more smell of soup drifting from the kitchen. No more soft eyes watching us as we did our homework. Just two children sitting quietly in a place that once felt like home, now filled with a silence too loud to ignore. And in that moment, I realized, some absences don't make a sound, but they collapse entire worlds within you. The hospital doors closed behind us with a dull, final sound. It echoed through the empty air like the end of something that once felt certain. Inside, everything was cold. The walls were white, too white, and the scent of antiseptic clung tightly to the air. It felt like we had stepped into a place where time slowed down and hope had to be earned. Emily clung to my hand as a nurse led us toward a row of stiff plastic chairs. They were hard, unforgiving, designed not for comfort, but for waiting. She didn't say much, just told us to sit here. Then she walked away. Just like that. Two children left alone in a place filled with adults, machines, and fear. We sat in silence. Emily didn't speak. I didn't either. Her small hand trembled in mine. She didn't cry. She just stared ahead, as if trying to make sense of the void that was slowly opening around us. I squeezed her hand tighter, trying to show her I was there, that I wouldn't let go. But the truth was, I was scared too. More scared than I had ever been. The minutes stretched. Each tick of the wall clock felt like it cut through the silence like a knife. Every time someone in a white coat passed by, my heart skipped a beat. Maybe they'd stop. Maybe they'd tell us something. But they kept walking. Every step they took away from us added to the weight in my chest. Then finally, a doctor approached. He wasn't in a hurry. His expression was soft, and his steps were calm. He looked at us kindly, bent down so he could speak at our level. "Your grandfather is still very weak," he said gently. "But he's fighting. He needs rest. You can see him for a short while, but only for a few minutes." Emily and I stood up and followed him through the corridor. The hallway stretched forever. Every footstep echoed around us like a memory trying to escape. When we entered the room, Grandpa was lying on a bed, covered in white sheets. Machines beeped softly beside him. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Then he stirred. He opened his eyes slowly and looked at us. A weak smile crept onto his face, the same smile that used to greet us every morning. I stepped forward, took his hand. It was cold. The pulse was faint. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Be strong," he said. "Take care of each other. Stay close." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat tightened and all I could do was nod. Emily stood next to me, her eyes red, tears threatening but not falling. She placed her small hand gently on his arm. She didn't say anything either. She didn't have to. We stayed just for a few moments, but each second felt like a memory being carved into stone. When the nurse gestured that it was time, I didn't want to let go. But Grandpa looked at me with an expression that said what words could not. "Go now. Grow up." And so we walked away, out of the room, down the hallway, back into the cold, carrying with us a weight too heavy for two children, a silence too vast to describe, and a fear that perhaps the days of safety were now behind us. Life without Grandpa, filled with emptiness and chilling silence. That night, when we came back from the hospital, the house felt strangely unfamiliar. Everything was still in its place. The old wooden chair by the window, Grandpa's slippers neatly tucked under the table, his scarf still hanging by the kitchen wall. But the most important thing was missing. There was no longer the comforting smell of hot soup rising in the air. No more quiet coughing. No familiar voice calling out, or his playful scolding whenever I forgot to wash my hands before dinner. We walked into the house like two shadows. Emily moved slowly, her eyes scanning the room as if hoping to find some trace that he might still be there. I looked too, but deep down, I already knew the truth I didn't want to face. This house, though still standing, no longer felt like home. Without Grandpa, it was just a silent collection of walls and furniture. Emily sat down at the dinner table, the place where Grandpa used to tell stories every night, and gently placed the tastiest bites onto her plate. She laid her head on the surface, her voice barely a whisper. "When will Grandpa come home?" My chest tightened. I didn't know how to answer. I couldn't promise. I couldn't lie. And I certainly couldn't speak the heartbreaking truth. So I stayed silent, gently placing a hand on her small shoulder, as if to say, "You're not alone." That night, neither of us slept well. I tossed and turned, listening to every little sound in the house. Each gust of wind rattling the roof made my heart jump. I kept hoping to hear him shifting in his room, or the soft steps of his slippers on the hallway floor. But all that answered me was an eerie stillness that filled the house. The next morning, I got up early. Grandpa was always the first to rise. He would make tea and quietly flip through the newspaper, humming under his breath. Today, the kitchen was cold, like a forgotten corner of the world. I opened the cupboard, pulled out some eggs and bread. I tried to make breakfast just like he used to, but I burned the eggs. The smell of smoke filled the air. The bread was too hard. I had no idea how to make things like he did. Emily walked in, her hair still messy, eyes puffy from a restless night. She sat down at the table, looked at the food, and took a small bite. Slowly, thoughtfully. "It doesn't taste like Grandpa's." I swallowed hard. I had nothing to say, because she was right. Nothing was the same anymore. No one could replace him. Nothing we did could bring things back to how they were. The house still had walls, a roof, and two children trying to grow up too fast. But the warmth, the soul of the house was gone. And the longing for him, it crept into every corner, every dish, every moment I burned the food trying to fill his place. I knew then, starting today, we had to learn to live in a world without Grandpa. But deep inside, I also knew, in the quiet things he left behind, like how to fold a towel, how to season a soup, or the words he used to repeat with gentle conviction, there was still a piece of him. And maybe, just maybe, if we were strong enough to remember, he would never truly be gone. The next morning, we still went to school. That was the plan. That was the routine. But nothing felt routine anymore. My backpack felt heavier than usual. My steps dragged on the pavement. My heart was somewhere else entirely, quietly sitting by Grandpa's hospital bed. The teacher was explaining a math lesson. Numbers filled the board. Symbols, equations, patterns. But they were just empty shapes to me. Her voice sounded distant, as if she were speaking through a foggy window. I didn't hear a thing. I didn't even try. My mind kept drifting to that hospital room, to the pale face of Grandpa, to his trembling hands and that soft, reassuring smile. At lunch, the schoolyard was filled with noise, children laughing, running, playing tag, but Emily and I sat alone inside the classroom. She stared at her lunchbox, not even opening it. I took a seat beside her, unwrapped my own, and tried to force myself to eat. One bite of the egg, dry, bland, tasteless. I gave up. I'm not hungry, Emily said softly, her voice barely audible. I nodded. Me neither. We didn't need to say more. Our silence said everything. When someone you love is lying in a cold hospital room, the world loses color. Food has no flavor. Numbers make no sense. Nothing else matters. Just that one person, and whether they're okay. At the end of the day, we walked home under the afternoon sun. The sky was blue. The air was warm. The birds were singing. But inside me, everything felt dim. I couldn't feel the warmth. The sunlight touched my skin, but not my heart. I felt cold, not from the weather, but from the growing emptiness that filled me. I wanted to go home quickly, to call the hospital, to ask how Grandpa was doing. I just wanted to hear his voice, one more time. Even just a few words. That would be enough, for now. That evening, the house was quiet as usual, but the silence felt heavier than before. Emily and I sat close together next to the old gray telephone that rested on a wooden cabinet Grandpa used to wipe every morning. Even the smallest noise from outside made us flinch. Emily looked at me with eyes full of questions she didn't speak. Suddenly the phone rang. My heart clenched for a second. I glanced at my sister and picked it up quickly. My voice trembled slightly. Hello. A gentle and calm voice spoke from the other end. Are you the grandson of Mr. George? Yes, I am his grandson. She continued. We wanted to inform you that his condition has stabilized. However, he still needs to stay in the hospital for further observation. I let out a quiet breath, feeling a bit of relief, but not completely. Stabilized sounded positive, but I knew it didn't mean he would come home soon. I gathered my courage and asked, Can my sister and I visit him? There was a short pause. Then her voice softened. Yes, but only for a short time. Please wear masks and keep your distance. He is still very weak. I nodded instinctively as if she could see me. Thank you. After I hung up, I turned to Emily. Grandpa is doing better. We can visit him. For the first time in days, her lips curled into a small smile. In that moment, I felt hope, but not enough. Deep inside, I still held on to one simple wish, that one day Grandpa would walk through that door again with his warm smile and bring life back into this quiet house. The next day, the sky was pale gray and a soft wind passed through the long hallway of the hospital. Emily and I held hands tightly as we entered the familiar room where Grandpa lay. The smell of antiseptic lingered, still unpleasant, but we had grown used to it over the past days. He was lying there, thinner than before, his skin paler, yet his eyes still carried warmth. When he saw us, he smiled. A weak smile, but enough to make my chest tighten. He slowly lifted a hand, gesturing us to come closer. He looked at us both, his voice barely more than a whisper. Have you been eating well? I nodded, but deep down, I knew I was lying. Our meals were rushed, cold, and missing him. Nothing tasted right. But I didn't want him to worry. His gaze lingered on me. Those eyes seemed to speak volumes, more than words could ever say. Then he reached out and held my hand. His fingers were thin, trembling, but still warm. He whispered, You must be strong. Take care of your sister. His voice trembled, but the words were clear, like he was pouring every last bit of trust he had into me. I nodded, but inside, I felt a weight settle over me. I understood. It wasn't just a request. It was a passing of the torch, a responsibility far greater than I'd ever known. And even though I was still just a boy, I knew I had to grow up, starting from that very moment. That night, as the lights in our home dimmed and the street outside grew quiet, I saw my little sister curled up in the corner of the room. Her face was clouded with sadness. In a soft, trembling voice, she said she wanted Grandpa to come home. I sat beside her and wrapped my arms around her gently. "We have to be patient," I whispered. But deep down, I wasn't calm at all. I lay awake that night, my mind spinning with thoughts no child should have to carry. Money, hospitals, school, and the future. I knew I couldn't sit still anymore. I had to do something. I had to find work. The next morning, I told Emily. She looked at me, worried. "You're just a kid." I looked her in the eye. "I'll find a way." After school that day, I didn't go home. I walked from street to street, peeking into every small shop. "Can I help with anything?" The bakery on the corner didn't even let me finish. "You're too young." I bowed my head, thanked them, and kept walking. I reached a small vegetable store. An older woman stepped out, eyeing me from head to toe. "What do you want to do?" I answered quickly. "I can do anything." She paused for a moment, then said she couldn't pay me much, but I could help clean. I nodded immediately without hesitation. "That's fine." She handed me a broom. "Start now." That evening, I came home with sore legs and dusty hands, but my heart felt lighter than it had in days. When Emily saw me step inside, her eyes lit up. "Did you find a job?" I grinned. I did. The next morning, I returned to the shop. I swept the floors, wiped the shelves, carried heavy bags of vegetables. Each time my arms ached, I thought about Grandpa. I thought about my sister. I thought about the dream of a warm, full meal. At the end of the day, the shopkeeper slipped a few coins into my hand. Good work. I held those coins tightly, feeling something I'd never felt before. It wasn't much, but it was the first thing I earned with my own sweat. That evening, I took Emily to the small market. We bought bread, a carton of milk, a few apples, and a little cheese. Sitting down to eat in our tiny room, I had never tasted anything so delicious. Emily grinned wide. "Better than yesterday." I laughed. "I'm learning." I woke up early before the sky turned blue. Without anyone calling me, I quietly made breakfast, warmed up milk, packed Emily's little lunch, and gently woke her for school. I didn't feel like a child anymore. I felt like someone who had to hold everything together. After school, I went straight to the vegetable shop. The owner was arranging crates when she looked at me. "Do you want to work every day?" I nodded hard. "Yes, I do." I didn't hesitate. I needed the job. I needed the money. I needed to take care of my family. That night, Emily and I ate dinner in our tiny room. There was no crying, no hunger growling in our bellies, just the sound of spoons clinking and my sister smiling. She looked at me. "You're amazing." I stayed quiet, but inside something shifted. I knew I wasn't just a boy anymore. I was growing up. I was learning to be strong. If this story touched you, please hit like, share it with someone who needs a little hope, and don't forget to subscribe to Kunzy Podcast English for more heart-touching stories that help you grow your English and your soul.